She knocked on my door with that look, the one that says this isn't a casual visit. And when she spoke, her words sliced through the quiet night, "We need to discuss you, and her." I didn't know it then, but nothing between us would ever feel the same after that. It was one of those quiet evenings where the world outside felt like it had exhaled. A steady rain tapped against the windows, soft enough to lull the mind, yet rhythmic enough to keep me awake. I'd turned off the TV hours ago, letting faint jazz fill the silence. The kind that makes your thoughts louder. She'd been on my mind again. Not in the restless, fleeting way someone crosses your thoughts, but in that calm, inevitable way a presence lingers. Her. 38, composed, graceful in a way that didn't demand attention but held it naturally. The way she tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear when she laughed. The way her eyes softened when she listened. I leaned back on the couch, replaying the last time we'd seen each other. It was late, the city quiet, her car idling at the curb. She handed me a coffee with a smile that felt warmer than the cup itself. Our fingers brushed, just briefly, but the contact was enough to leave a quiet imprint on my skin. She looked at me for a moment, really looked, and in that silence, something unspoken passed between us. Not a promise, not a confession, just a truth neither of us had dared to name yet. I didn't expect the knock. It came sharply, 3 taps that broke through the music like a pebble hitting still water. My stomach tightened before my brain caught up. I stood, crossed the room, and opened the door. My sister stood there. Hair damp from the rain, arms crossed over her chest, eyes steady in a way that made me straighten up without meaning to. She didn't bother with pleasantries. "Can we talk?" she asked. Not soft, not harsh, just deliberate. I stepped aside. She walked in like she belonged there, which she did. We'd been close growing up. She'd always been the one who caught trouble before it reached me, the shield and the voice of reason. But tonight, something in her presence felt different. She stood in the center of the living room, taking in the scene, the half-empty mug on the table, the dim lights, the jazz humming like a secret, and then she turned to me with a look that made my chest tighten. "We need to discuss you, and her." The rain grew louder just then, like the world was leaning in to listen. I didn't say anything at first. Part of me had been waiting for this moment, maybe even expecting it. She's observant. She notices things I don't even realize I'm revealing. My heart beat a little faster. Not out of guilt, but out of something more complicated. Because this wasn't just a passing crush. This was becoming real. She gestured toward the couch, as if to say, "Sit. This won't be a 2-minute talk." And as we sat facing each other, with the weight of her words still hanging in the air, I realized, this wasn't just about her opinion. It was about what I was willing to stand by. The kitchen had always been our unofficial, truth room. Growing up, every serious talk happened here, late nights over cereal, whispered confessions under the warm glow of the overhead light. Tonight, that same soft light fell between us, casting gentle shadows on the table, making everything feel both familiar and uncomfortably serious. My sister leaned forward, elbows resting on the edge of the table, fingers laced tightly together like she was bracing herself for impact. There was no hostility in her eyes, just that quiet, alert concern I'd seen 100 times before. She'd always been the first to notice when something was off with me. She started slowly, her voice measured. "Look. I'm not here to attack you." A small exhale. "But I've been hearing things. Seeing things." I didn't say anything. She didn't need encouragement, she was already on a path she'd clearly rehearsed in her head. "People have been talking," she continued. "About you. About her." Her eyes searched mine carefully, as if gauging how much I'd flinch. "I see the way you look at her. And I've seen the way she looks back. I'm not judging, okay? But I'd be lying if I said I wasn't concerned." She wasn't wrong. There was something in the way we looked at each other, a softness that lingered longer than it should have, a warmth that didn't belong to casual acquaintances. It wasn't something either of us had declared out loud, but anyone paying attention could feel the undercurrent. She reached for her cup, her fingers tapping against the ceramic before she took a sip. "You're my brother," she said finally, her tone gentler. "It's my job to make sure you don't walk into something that could break you. She's older. She's different. People will have opinions. And she paused, eyes softening. I just want to know if you've really thought this through." Her words weren't cruel. They came from love, but love wrapped in worry has its own kind of weight. I leaned back in my chair, my hands loosely clasped in my lap. I wasn't angry. How could I be? She was doing exactly what she'd always done, protect me, even from things I didn't fully understand yet. But this time, her protective instinct brushed against something sacred. The memory of her laugh echoed in my mind. The way she tilted her head slightly when she was curious. The calmness she carried, like someone who had weathered storms and learned not to flinch at the first drop of rain. What I felt for her wasn't some reckless fling that needed shielding, it was quieter, deeper, like something growing in the spaces neither of us had intended to water. My sister studied my silence. She knew me well enough to see when my mind was somewhere else. "I'm not saying you shouldn't feel what you feel," she said finally. "I just need to know that if you're stepping into this, you're not stepping in blind." The jazz from the other room hummed faintly through the walls, soft and steady, as if time itself had slowed down to let me decide how to answer. I didn't have the perfect response. But the weight in my chest told me this conversation wasn't just about defending a feeling. It was about acknowledging that something very real was happening. When the door finally closed behind her, the silence didn't rush back in the way I expected. It hung there, heavy, contemplative, like a thick fog settling over the room. I stood for a moment in the dimly lit hallway, her words replaying in a quiet loop in my head. "I just need to know that if you're stepping into this, you're not stepping in blind." I walked back to the living room and sank onto the couch. The rain outside had softened to a mist, and the faint glow of the street lamp outside filtered through the window, washing the room in a pale amber hue. The jazz track had ended long ago, leaving behind only the sound of water gently sliding down the glass. It was strange, how one conversation could stir up feelings you thought you had tucked neatly away. Her questions didn't scare me, they made me face what I'd been avoiding naming outright. I closed my eyes and let myself drift back to the first time I'd seen her. It was at a friend's gathering last winter. A small get-together, nothing loud or extravagant. She wasn't the kind of woman who needed to announce her presence. She just was. Her laughter wasn't the high-pitched kind that demanded attention, it was soft, warm, with a weight that made you feel like it came from somewhere real. I remember noticing how she carried herself. Not with arrogance, but with quiet assurance. She wore a deep green sweater, her hair tied loosely at the nape of her neck, a few strands framing her face in a way that made her look effortlessly elegant. And when she spoke, people listened, not because she raised her voice, but because her words carried gravity. We'd ended up in conversation near the fireplace that night. Nothing extraordinary, books, music, life. But something about the ease between us lingered. I remember the way her eyes met mine when she listened. Not scanning. Not distracted. Present. It unnerved me in the gentlest way. Over the months that followed, it wasn't grand gestures that pulled me closer. It was the quiet moments. The way she'd remember small details I'd mentioned offhand. The way her hand would brush mine when passing something, a touch so subtle yet so charged it made my pulse skip for a breath. Sitting there now, alone in the half-light, I let the truth settle without resistance, I was falling for her. Not quickly. Not recklessly. But steadily, like the slow pull of a tide you don't notice until the water's wrapped around your ankles. This wasn't a crush I could shrug off. This was the kind of connection that made you rethink where you stood and who you were becoming. My sister's concern echoed in the background, but it didn't overshadow the quiet certainty growing inside me. Whatever this was, it mattered. More than I had admitted to anyone, including myself. I leaned forward, elbows on my knees, hands clasped loosely. For the first time, I wasn't just replaying her smile or the way her fingers lingered against mine. I was asking myself the question that would shape everything that came next: was I ready to stand by this? The next afternoon carried the quiet stillness that follows a night of heavy rain. The streets were washed clean, the air crisp with that faint earthy scent only rain can leave behind. I had no plans, just a slow day at home, catching up on loose ends, replaying last night's conversation with my sister in the back of my mind like a persistent melody that wouldn't fade. I was halfway through making tea when the doorbell rang. A soft chime, unexpected, but not alarming. I wiped my hands on a towel and opened the door. She stood there. Wearing a light beige coat tied loosely at the waist, hair pulled back with a few strands falling around her face, she looked effortlessly elegant. Her cheeks were slightly flushed from the cool air outside, and her eyes carried that familiar warmth that always made the room feel subtly different the moment she entered. "Hey," she said softly, a smile tugging at the corner of her lips. "I was in the neighborhood, thought I'd stop by." I felt that little shift in my chest, the one that happens every time our worlds collide in these quiet, unplanned ways. "Yeah, of course. Come in," I said, stepping aside. She slipped off her coat, revealing a simple black sweater and jeans. Nothing extravagant. But there was something about the way she carried simplicity, it felt deliberate, graceful. She followed me to the living room, her presence warming the space instantly. "Something on your mind?" she asked, her tone gentle but perceptive, like she could sense the subtle current beneath the surface. I hesitated. For a moment, I considered telling her about my sister's visit. About the conversation that had peeled away the layers I'd been carefully keeping to myself. But I stopped short, not out of fear, but because I needed to process it first. I wasn't ready to cast a shadow over this moment. So instead, I handed her a mug of tea. "Just one of those days," I said with a small smile. She nodded knowingly and settled onto the couch beside me, not too close, but close enough that the warmth between us was tangible. As she passed me a sugar spoon, her fingers grazed mine. A tiny, fleeting touch, but it was enough to send a quiet jolt through me. That familiar spark, not loud, not chaotic, just steady, alive. We talked for a while. About nothing and everything. Her work. A book she'd started reading. The way the city looked after rain. She spoke with that soft steadiness I'd grown to love, like every sentence came from a thoughtful place. At one point, her voice dipped, a hint of vulnerability slipping through as she admitted, "Sometimes I wonder if I've spent too much of my life trying to keep everyone else comfortable." Her honesty lingered in the air like the faint steam rising from our mugs. I looked at her then, not just at her face, but into her. And for a moment, the rest of the world fell away. She caught my gaze, and for the briefest second, neither of us looked away. No words. Just quiet understanding. I didn't know where the road ahead would lead, but sitting there, with the soft light catching the edges of her hair and her presence grounding me in a way nothing else did, I knew this wasn't a passing chapter. It was becoming the story. I didn't plan for it to happen that way. Life has a way of staging moments you're not quite ready for, moments where everything you've been balancing quietly in your mind suddenly collides in real time. She was still there that evening. We'd finished our tea, and she was browsing through a small stack of books on my shelf, smiling at my slightly chaotic arrangement. The warm amber of the floor lamp wrapped around her, softening the edges of the room. I was in the kitchen rinsing mugs when the front door opened. "Hey," came a familiar voice. My sister. She rarely knocked when it came to me, she'd always had that easy access, a leftover habit from years of shared childhood. But the second her voice reached the living room, my heart skipped. She stepped in, damp curls falling loosely around her shoulders, still in her work clothes. Her gaze shifted from me to the woman standing by the bookshelf. In that split second, the atmosphere changed. Not hostile. Just, charged. Like the air right before thunder. The woman turned toward her with that natural grace that never felt performative. "Hi," she said warmly, offering a genuine smile. "I don't think we've met properly." My sister's polite smile was immediate, but I could read her. I always could. Behind that politeness was a quiet wall going up, protective and assessing. "No, we haven't," she replied, stepping closer. "I'm his sister." The woman nodded, extending her hand. "It's nice to finally meet you." They shook hands, and in that single exchange, I saw two worlds measuring each other. My sister, cautious and watchful. Her, calm and grounded, meeting the moment with poise. I invited her to stay for a bit, but my sister waved off the offer. "I just came to drop off something," she said, placing a folded envelope on the table. Still, she didn't leave immediately. She lingered. Observing. Listening. The three of us ended up in the living room for what couldn't have been more than 10 minutes, but it felt stretched, like time had slowed just enough for every glance and silence to register. The woman didn't try to overcompensate. She didn't perform warmth. She simply existed in that space, offering small talk, asking my sister a couple of thoughtful questions, pouring herself and me another round of tea like she belonged. Not presumptuous, just quietly present. My sister, on the other hand, wore the kind of polite expression that hides 1,000 thoughts. Her responses were short, careful. Not cold. Just, testing. When the woman eventually left, she touched my forearm gently before stepping out. "I'll see you soon," she said, her voice low, eyes lingering on mine for a second longer than usual. A small squeeze. A silent reassurance. The door closed behind her, leaving the faint scent of her perfume hanging in the air, soft, floral, unmistakable. My sister stood by the table, arms crossed loosely. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then, in a tone that wasn't accusatory but deeply thoughtful, she said quietly, "You really care about her, don't you?" There was no point denying it. The silence that followed was enough of an answer. She sighed, not the heavy, disappointed kind. More like the sound someone makes when they realize something bigger is at play than they'd expected. "Okay," she murmured, almost to herself. The tension didn't vanish, but something shifted. The unspoken truth was finally out in the open. The night after she left, I couldn't shake the look on my sister's face. Not anger. Not disapproval. Just a quiet, unsettled understanding. It followed me through the evening like a soft echo. By the next day, I knew what I needed to do. Not to defend myself, but to speak honestly. For once, I didn't want this to be something happening in shadows, between glances and whispered feelings. I wanted it to stand in the open, even if it shook the ground a little. My sister's apartment was just across town. She opened the door in her usual comfortable sweats, hair tied up, the smell of chamomile tea drifting out. She looked surprised to see me but stepped aside wordlessly. I walked in, closing the door behind me, my heart oddly steady. The living room was familiar, photos from childhood scattered on the shelves, a soft throw draped over the couch. She sat cross-legged on the armchair while I took the couch across from her. For a few moments, neither of us spoke. The only sound was the quiet hum of the heater and the faint ticking of a wall clock. She broke the silence first. "I wasn't expecting you tonight." "I know," I replied. "I just didn't want last night to sit between us like that." Her brows softened, but she stayed quiet. "I know you're worried," I continued slowly. "And I get it. You've always looked out for me. But I need you to hear this, not as my sister trying to protect me, but as someone who knows me better than anyone." She leaned forward slightly, elbows resting on her knees. I met her eyes, steady this time, no hesitation left. "She means something to me," I said simply. "More than I've let on. More than I probably even realized myself at first." She didn't interrupt. It's not some sudden, reckless thing, I went on. It's been, growing. Quietly. In the way she listens. The way she makes space for silence without making it awkward. The way I feel when I'm around her, like I can just be, without trying to fit into something I'm not. She doesn't need me to prove anything. She just sees me. I let the words hang there, unpolished and honest. My sister looked down at her mug, fingers tracing the rim thoughtfully. You're serious, she said finally. Not as a question, but as a realization. I am, I replied softly. She exhaled slowly, a breath that carried layers, worry, love, maybe a touch of surrender. I just don't want to see you get hurt. People talk. They always will. And she trailed off, her voice dipping. I've seen you give so much of yourself before. I nodded. I know. And maybe people will talk. But I'd rather be misunderstood than pretend this doesn't matter. Because it does. To me. Her eyes lifted back to mine. There was a shift, subtle but real. The guard she'd held up wasn't gone entirely, but it had lowered enough for something else to come through, respect. Maybe even reluctant acceptance. She got up, crossed the small space between us, and placed a hand lightly on my shoulder. Then just, be sure you're choosing this with your eyes open, she said quietly. I am, I answered. And for the first time, I truly believed it. The park was nearly empty that evening. The kind of quiet that only autumn seems to carry, a crisp breeze, a few golden leaves swirling lazily across the path, the sky painted in streaks of orange and soft rose. Sunset has a way of slowing everything down, like it's urging you to speak the words you've been holding back. She was already there when I arrived, standing near the bench where we'd met for coffee once months ago. Her beige coat was pulled tight around her, hair gently tousled by the wind. She turned when she heard my footsteps, and that familiar softness filled her eyes. You sounded serious on the phone, she said, half smiling, though I could see the flicker of uncertainty underneath. She wasn't someone who demanded answers, but she always read between lines. I needed to talk to you, I said simply. We sat down side by side on the weathered wooden bench. The fading light wrapped around us, casting long, delicate shadows. For a moment, neither of us spoke. I just listened to the rustle of leaves and the distant sound of kids playing somewhere down the path. I should have told you sooner, I began, my voice steady. My sister, she knows. About us. Or at least, she senses it. She came over the other night. Her eyebrows lifted slightly, but she didn't interrupt. She folded her hands in her lap, a quiet composure settling over her. She was worried, I continued. Not because she doesn't like you, she barely knows you. She's just, protective. She's always been that way. And honestly, I get it. A small breeze swept through, catching a few loose strands of her hair. Without thinking, I reached up and gently tucked one behind her ear. Her eyes held mine the entire time, steady, searching. And what did you tell her? She asked softly. I drew in a slow breath. That this matters to me. That I'm not walking into this blind. That what I feel for you isn't some fleeting thing. For the first time since we sat down, something shifted in her expression, a mix of relief, warmth, and something deeper. She reached out slowly, her fingers finding mine. The moment our hands touched, everything else faded. She intertwined her fingers with mine, her thumb tracing gentle circles on the back of my hand. A quiet, wordless reassurance. I'm not going anywhere unless you want me to, she whispered. The world seemed to still around us. The colors of the sunset deepened, birds drifted across the sky, and the sound of our breaths mingled in the cool air. I do, I said. I want you here. Not hidden. Not halfway. Her smile then wasn't wide or dramatic. It was real. The kind of smile that starts in the eyes and settles slowly in the heart. I squeezed her hand gently, feeling that familiar calm wash over me. This wasn't some cinematic grand gesture. It was something quieter, sturdier, two people choosing to stand in their truth, even if the world had opinions. As the last streaks of sunlight disappeared behind the trees, she leaned her head lightly against my shoulder. I didn't need to say anything else. Neither did she. For the first time, it didn't feel like something we were tiptoeing around. It felt like ours.